Welcome back to Natural 2, our D&D and tabletop role-playing podcast slash talk show, which I think is finally the actually defined term that I use nowadays. But James, you have returned from the Shadow Realm. Welcome back, sir. How was your little adventure?
Uh, like being on a desert island. Uh, you don't know what you've got till it's gone, my man. Yeah, the internet went bye-bye for a while. Um, but it's back now, and it feels like I've rejoined the rest of planet Earth for good and for ill.
You gotta take the good with the bad, I suppose. But it is good to have you back, sir. So.
Thank you very much.
But anyway, the actual topic at hand for today, the hotly contested, debated, or thrown around term that is in the D&D online community sphere is the whole 6 to 8 encounters a day thing that's like recommended in the DMG, that's also thrown around by advice people on, Reddit and forums and things of that nature. And a lot of people, at least from my understanding, kind of perusing this topic, take that as, oh, there's no way that you can do 6 to 8 combat encounters even during a session or during an adventuring day. That's insane. That's too much to ask. It's not, doesn't work with the story, this, that, and the other thing. And what I think there is a fundamental misunderstanding there when someone says encounter that doesn't translate one-to-one to combat. The way that I've seen it best described and kind of the way that I would introduce the topic is an encounter, as far as like a D&D term, is something that expends, stresses, limits, or I guess like wears down the various resources that an adventuring party might have, whether that's HP, spell slots, gold, equipment, time. It could be a lot of different aspects of the game. And so an encounter, in the kind of non-traditional sense, might be a very tall, sheer cliff wall that they have to somehow traverse. Maybe it takes a rope and a grappling hook. Maybe it takes a fly spell, which is a spell slot. Maybe it takes time, which, might be a valuable resource. And if you start picturing your adventures or your dungeons or your sessions as these separate encounters, like the combat, then the rock wall, then the water trap fall pit, and then the boss battle, then you can actually achieve that recommended encounter number per day. And I think that's the general topic that we'll go over. There's a lot to kind of spread out from there, but that's my initial pitch.
Yeah, I think any time you could say that the party or some fraction of the party is in a situation where it is them versus something or someone, I think that's an encounter. Whether it's player versus trap, or player versus puzzle, or player versus
person, like a social encounter.
Player versus the evil sheriff that's trying to take all their gold for taxes. And you're trying to intimidate your way out of it or talk your way out of it in one way or another. So anytime there's a conflict in the literary sense, that is at least arguably an encounter.
I think what a lot of the confusion stems from is like D&D itself doesn't really do a great job of clarifying what an encounter is, and I think there are even places where they use the term encounter specifically to refer to a combat encounter. And it also probably doesn't help that like D&D Beyond has the encounter builder, which is literally just a combat builder. So a lot of people who kind of get into D&D through there get that terminology kind of locked in. So that is probably where it all stems from. But I think where most often this topic is brought up is it's almost kind of the essential key or answer to the martial and caster power discrepancy that everyone loves talking about and loves bringing up. And the reason it is kind of the key is casters usually are a lot more effective when they have their spell slots, and they are more powerful than the martials when they have everything readily accessible to them. So if they get plenty of long rests, if they're not stressed properly, if they don't expend their spell slots enough, then they're always going to outperform the martial. Where martials kind of have this line of power that they constantly rest on. It doesn't really go up or down usually. So when the wizards are all spent and it's just beating things to death with sticks, that's when the marshals look better because the casters are now kind of useless. That's at least as far as I understand how the game is supposed to be designed and balanced, and why this core concept is so key to a lot of people's issues around that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that balance. I feel like balance is a dirty word in D&D for me personally. I think it's a fool's errand to chase after balance with too much focus or too much of your energy. But if there is a disparity at your table that people are feeling, if it feels like, man, his character always gets to shine and his character is always killing everything first, then that is something to look at in terms of how you are dividing up the challenges to the party, and the resources that they have to expend. Um, if in your campaign you're having a fight a week, then there's no reason a fight an in-game week, I should say. If you're having one fight every in-game week, then there's no reason for everybody not to go Nova,
Mhm.
because they know that's the only fight, and that's going to make the characters with the bigger Nova seem way more powerful. So that um, I think it's I think it also is at least as much art as science in terms of feeling your table out and looking at the composition of the party and getting creative about, okay, well, he's been walking all over uh the stuff I've put in front of them for the last 2 or 3 weeks, so now I'm going to make sure that uh he's at he's got a tough row to hoe this time.
Hmm. I mean, there are actual ways to try and implement a very combat heavy arc or adventure. And I guess usually the pushback to that is like, oh, if I have a whole like session or two that is just dedicated to combat, it's gonna get dragged out and slow and monotonous and people are gonna get bored. And like that is, I think, a really difficult like hurdle to overcome. Like doing straight combat for a long period of time is very taxing. So I think the better alternative is highlighting really impactful combats and then stressing those same resources that you would have with the combat by other means. And of course, like that's where the whole like be creative and use your imagination is kind of like the tool there. There are probably endless ways you could somehow work this into the current story that you're doing or the world that you're building, or even like you could probably, depending on how healthy your group is, go to a player directly and be like, hey, we both know it's a problem that you come in and blow all 8 smites on your first attack, and you know for sure that a long rest is coming. Let's figure out something here. And again, if the player is reasonable, there's probably a good dialogue to have there. I think I might do a little Uno reverse card today. I think I'm going to recommend something to the players that I, as a DM, usually see as overstepped, and I'll see if you have something for the DMs that you might be able to use. What I would say to players on this topic is combat is very overemphasized in the like importance and the feel goods and the fun and the excitement of D&D, where so often a very essential story element or item or plot point or whatever is solved by stealth or diplomacy or persuasion or whatever other skill that isn't I kill things and do a lot of damage. And it's glossed over. It's not, held up with the same weight. And so I think a lot of people or a lot of players put so much emphasis on doing well in combat and being badass in combat and that being the thing that like really gets them energized, that it's an injustice to all the other cool things that are accomplished in D&D that other characters accomplish. That's part of like the team, because that cool combat can't happen if you don't persuade the guard for the key and have this thing and that lore and the, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be my little 2 cents, is try and appreciate the non-combat encounters, I suppose, or successes.
And bearing in mind, if you are the DM, what your characters are good at and what they're not good at, I think that some territory that's been covered pretty well by now is that the original 5e Ranger doesn't stack up very well with other classes in most people's games. And one of the reasons for that, probably not the only reason, but a big reason for that is people didn't make enough use of the facet of the game that the authors had in mind. People weren't really leaning on that exploration pillar the way that the Ranger, the original base 5e Ranger, expects and looks for them to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the game's full of other smaller examples. Like that's an entire class or an entire subclass that's built around this concept that you've got to have in the game, or else that player is going to have much less of a fun time. But there are other subclasses. There are feats. There's if your character wants to be, if you have a player who wants to make a master of disguise, you've got to give them a reason to sneak in somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And if there isn't gonna be, then you either have to invent a reason or tell them they should play something else. I think that is what I mean when I say that balance is an illusion, is that balance is not something that comes from the book. Not really. It comes from the DM.
Mm-hmm.
The DM can make life easy or hard for any character at the table to an infinite degree. And so it's maybe there are classes that are easier or more difficult to balance for, but um, if you're feeling underpowered, then first, what you're saying, maybe see if there's a part of the game that the DM is putting in front of you that you're not engaging with, because it's not being solved by your preferred method for solving problems. And the DM needs to be sure that they understand their party's abilities and their
Mm-hmm.
party's strengths and weaknesses. And not to avoid the weaknesses either. Sometimes you need to hammer on that weakness um, in order to make things exciting or bring that character down a peg or give another character a chance to shine.
There's
It's
like a, oh, sorry.
I'm saying it like it's very simple. It's not. This is easy to learn, hard to master, right? These
Mm-hmm.
are concepts that DMs that have been playing probably longer than I've been alive continually have to think about and remind themselves of, and so on and so on. So don't feel bad. Just keep it in mind.
There's a piece of advice that's thrown around a lot, and I don't hate it, but I usually kind of look at it with a little bit of skepticism. And it's the, oh, I don't think of solutions for my puzzles as a DM. I just make them and let the party solve them. And on one hand, I do kind of appreciate it because then it does just open up whatever solution the party does have to being the answer to the problem. But I think that advice can also be implemented poorly where you don't think about what solution they may have. And they either might have a very easy direct solution, which then they just pass over whatever you had planned, which isn't satisfying, or they have absolutely no solution, and then everyone's sitting there banging their heads against the desk, and then you implement some very lucky NPC that strolls by that has a little tidbit of information. And I think that kind of applies to what you were saying. Like, you have to understand your group, their abilities, the dynamics, and kind of the players' wants, desires, needs, like an enjoyment, so that like you're hitting all those various things. Like if you're not building and crafting the game and the encounters and the problems and solutions to the people you're playing with, I would say that you're at least missing out on a lot of stuff, or at the worst end, you're doing harm to your game by ignoring that. But yeah, I think that I more or less align with what you were saying, sir.
And this is a little bit of a tangent, but on that note, uh, they say that when you're trying to build a mystery in the game, that you need to leave more clues than the party will need. You like don't rely on any one clue, like they have to find this clue or they're not going to be able to proceed. And I think in general, that's probably good advice for all encounters. Um, not everything can have multiple answers, of course, because that could get absurd.
Well, I think applying that to even like combat encounters, right? Where you always expect the party to win the combat encounter. That's kind of like the foregone conclusion. But you should be ready for them to fail without it just being simply a TPK, right? Like, you should
Yeah.
have at least some concept in your mind of like, hey, if they don't win, or it's even like a Pyrrhic victory, or it's like a draw of some sort, what does that look like? What do I have prepared? What can I do with that? Like, you should have some sort of alternative, at least vaguely started in your head for basically any choice or encounter that the party will run into, and that applies across the whole game. So,
And the same for puzzles. If your party just cannot handle puzzles or refuses to engage with them, um, give it a try. I mean, I like including puzzles. Puzzles are classic, but there must be a way to proceed other than solving the puzzle if it becomes necessary.
mhm.
Um, and that we can save the details for another video. But my point is, as I said, it's not just for mysteries. Try try to avoid, unless you're very confident or very comfortable in your scenario, try to avoid situations where the only way for the party to progress is this one way.
Mhm. Well, you have any other thoughts that tag along to our topic, sir?
So when it comes to fitting an appropriate number of encounters in your game day, broaden your scope. It doesn't just have to be 6 to 8 fights with goblins and orcs, or even 6 to 8 fights. An encounter means many different things potentially.
Do you want to try and on the spot each of us come up with a like a vague 6 to 8 encounters that might formulate an adventuring day or request?
Right. Okay. That's a fun idea.
Okay. You want,
Let's
want to
let's just
start or
say
want me to?
six.
Okay.
Let's just go for six.
Who's going first?
You go first. It was your idea. Your
Okay.
bright idea.
So I'm gonna go with the very stereotypical. They're delving into some sort of dungeon to achieve some sort of end goal. You know, cut and dry. Everyone knows it. I think ideally, the first like encounter that I would kind of put forward is maybe some sort of like information barricade or roadblock, or at least like an opportunity might be the better term for it, where maybe they can sneak in and overhear a conversation, or maybe they can use some sort of scrying spell, or find a different avenue, or learn more about like the geography of the dungeon. And so while this isn't, attacking their HP, maybe it is like limiting their time. Like, let's say there's like a captive or something they're trying to save. Maybe they can't spend all day doing this kind of stuff. Or perhaps it is, a spell slot that they use, or some other aspect. That would be my first kind of introduction. Then I would probably place some sort of combat encounter, whether that is like they run into something and it flees deeper into the cave, or if it's like a kind of introductory, like here's the different elements and creatures and mechanics you might be dealing with down the road. It would, stress them a little bit, but isn't designed to like roadblock them or stop them in any meaningful way. It's more, again, just kind of get their foot in the door. That would then be the time that I might start including things like a trap room, and that could be a whole number of things, such as like maybe they have to cut their hand and expend literally a certain amount of hit points to start some ritual, or maybe they have to like burn a scroll to do something or use a magical item usage to get over a gap or some sort of inconvenience. That's a pretty simple cut and dry one. And while there's probably some way that they could roll really well or come up with something that doesn't drain their resources, I still would see that as a win because your players are thinking and being creative and putting energy into the game to not expend those resources. So you should reward them for doing so. Then perhaps there is another encounter there. So this would be our third, I suppose. And this would be more of like the defining kind of stressful thing where they start, oh, I'm running low on spell slots, or I'm at half HP, I need a heal, where it's becoming more apparent that they're in the thick of it. Then you have an opportunity to include like two more things of like maybe they have to find this creature or BBEG that they're tracking down. So again, that could be a time thing or a skills thing, or maybe they've been poisoned. That's one way to help the whole time thing, and now they have to figure out a solution or figure out where it is during that limit. I think right before I would leave that last encounter to kind of be the climactic like big fight or kind of last little hoorah that usually is the most satisfying way to end something or kind of mark the end of something. So that fifth encounter, I would almost recommend always being some sort of social encounter. And that doesn't mean that they're trying to like persuade the villain out of his evil ways or kind of swindle something. I would almost kind of build it up to, if they succeed, the upcoming fight is easier in some way. Whether they have convinced an ally to their side, or they have like cleared the evil guy's henchmen out because they've shown him his evil ways. Like that could go a whole various spectrum of ways or routes. And then that allows some of the more RP elements of D&D to come in, maybe the face of the party to kind of get their moment that really defines that final fight that then descends into the D&D chaos of, I'm running out of spell slots, I'm down, oh, are you going to win this? Oh, how do you want to do this? And, storybook ending, Finn. That would be my very loose and kind of on-the-spot building process.
So I think that an easy way to add more possibilities for encounters is to add layers or to add complexity. So not just here's the dungeon, get to the bottom, or there's the treasure, get it and bring it back, but to start layering these things. So I'm imagining that the party has been tasked, they've been hired to guard an archaeological expedition. And so now their clearing of the dungeon doesn't just depend on their ability to brute force it. They've got this group with these other skill sets that they also have to be aware of and surface. And so I'm thinking that first there's a rival company that's trying to jump the claim, and that I like to leave choices. So that could either be a social encounter or a combat encounter, depending on how the conversation goes or the mood that the party is in. Um, and then finding and securing the location. This can be an opportunity for the people in the party with those wilderness skills to shine. But if they don't, if there's no one like that in the party, or if for some reason they don't make that role, then it falls onto the group that they're protecting to pick up that slack, and maybe it just takes more time, or their position that they're in is not as strong or ideal as it would have been if the party themselves had managed. Third, I think the the tomb that the archaeologists were looking for is located and breached, and now you've got traps to deal with. Good trap encounter. Again, I like to combo these things, so it's a pictogram puzzle that if the party gets the solution, they can avoid a fight with undead tomb guardians, or they can be like, screw it, and fight the undead tomb guardians.
Mm-hmm.
And the final encounter is when they find that the tomb was actually built over top of an even older structure that uh, this ancient civilization was trying to revere or trying to secure. And inside is an androsphinx, and the androsphinx is not inherently evil or hostile, but is there to make sure that the unworthy do not access this chamber. And uh this would be again very open-ended for mine.
Mm-hmm.
To my mind, you can either, I mean, you can try to fight the androsphinx, and androsphinx is not a joke, so that would absolutely be a boss battle. Or you can try to convince the Androsphinx that you're worthy, or you can prove that you are worthy through some other means. Um, that I want to. That would be when I would want to see, like, all right, you've got this significant obstacle, and there's potentially several ways through it. You could even decide this is too much. We can't handle this Androsphinx. We're going to leave and come back later, if that's what the party wants to do. But yeah, there's my adventure off the top of the dome.
Yeah. And I mean, like, the way that I would apply that or approach that is that's how you can design things. Like mine was very straightforward and kind of like there's a singular goal and this is what we're always heading towards, while yours was kind of like a branching decision-making series of events. And either way, you as a DM can only prep and plan and balance to a certain extent before you let the party engage and then deal with the consequences is probably a bad term, but that's kind of what it turns into. So don't, I guess, like get hyper fixated on this. You might even want to kind of leave it as vague as we did of like, here's the loose idea of what I want and what I have kind of prepped in my head. If it goes that way, great. I'll look like a mastermind. If it doesn't, gotta start leaning on that improv. So that would be like, I guess, a little tail end of everything that I would have.
What I'm what I'm realizing and really able to put into words right now is that if you want to hit that number, that arbitrary number, or if you really want to make sure that the party is challenged in a particular way, it does take some planning. That 6 to 8 encounters is rarely something that's just going to happen
Mm-hmm.
organically. So, especially if you're not keeping the pressure on, because the party would be foolish not to recoup their resources and
Mm-hmm.
play optimally if they can. Um, so it doesn't. Again, you don't just open the DMG and these things fall out.
Mm-hmm.
It takes some planning, some art, some science.
Well, I think that's all that I have, sir. Anything else shaking from your noggin?
Just leave your comments down below and like and subscribe, and let us know what you think. Let us know what you'd like talked about in a future episode, and let us know what your favorite dice look like. Just put something down there. All right, I'll read it. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be Hemingway. Don't be shy.
Or more topically, put your favorite non-combat encounter that you use in your game and add to the conversation.
All of it. Make a new comment for each one of those.
Make a new comment for every letter and just make sure you comment in sequence so you don't get broken up.
Yeah, there you go.
But I think that will bring us to a conclusion. Thank you all for tuning in and listening and watching, if you are. And have a good day.
Till next time.